America.
Oh, hey. Let me pull that up. All right. Well, yeah, I was supposed to do, I had all my stuff ready for the minimum wage. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, but cool.
Yeah. Nice.
So I just, as you probably saw, I just typed that up. I had time, I guess.
Yeah, same here.
So yeah, notification. This is going to be very free flowing, I guess. I didn't have anything prepared for it, but
Me neither.
should be fun. Okay,
Yep.
so I'm going to argue for free market medicine, and that socialized medicine eventually just collapses, that it doesn't work. It in its base, it calls for rationing, and eventually you have to ration more. And it's kind of what Margaret Thatcher said, even, problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's what happens with socialized medicine. And so they come up with lists. You can look at the VA and the two different lists, and they try to cover up the mistakes they make. But you end up getting heavy rationing and long lines and all those problems. So that's kind of the very, I guess, basis of the thesis.
So my point of contention is that a market healthcare standard still has rationing. It's just done through price signaling. So as long as there's a price signal, there's rationing to be done based on how someone can afford or not afford certain aspects of the healthcare. So in the end, they are near the same, whereas private healthcare may have benefits in the long run for research and development, but in the short run, the benefit goes to higher living standards and length of life with socialized medicine.
Okay, I would say obviously everything is rationed, right? Because we have scarcity. So you
Yes.
said you're an econ student.
Yes.
Yeah. So I teach economics, so that's why okay, this is great. Lots of fun. But as we know, everything is rationed via price because we have scarcity in this world, and of course we can go into the goal of humanity. I think that an economist's goal should be, how do we make people's lives better via the fact that scarcity exists. And we know because of scarcity that price is the best way. I made a mistake. I shouldn't say best. It's most efficient way to ration any scarce goods, right? Because price.
See, that's subjective. That's where it gets subjective, because from an efficiency standpoint, yes, but from a moral standpoint, excluding the fact that there's the idea of the moral precipice of falling off when it comes to taking something from someone to redistribute it. If you remove that fact from it and you start taking it as a consequentialist standpoint, whereas those who have the most to gain are going to be the ones picked through these, you can even call them death panels. So at the end of the day, whereas private healthcare will primarily benefit older, more wealthier, and more well-to-do individuals, whereas a socialized healthcare will actually benefit the younger, more healthier, and that's strictly through a consequentialist viewpoint.
Yeah, so I had said best, and I corrected myself. Right? I said most efficient way. Yes. Economics deals with the way the world is, and an economist thinks rationally, and he doesn't think in terms of morality, right? That's kind of what typically...
It's amoral. Yeah, it's amoral.
Yeah, so we think in Econ 101, you probably remember, well, it'd be like 201, probably like the first week, generally, I talk about the idea that economics doesn't deal with morality. Now, in my own opinion, I believe that an economist, there are certain things where morality does come into play via property rights and things like that, which I think you got into. Socialized medicine tends to violate property rights because it's forcing one person to pay for another person. But so morality, it doesn't really come into play here necessarily, but once you do want to bring in morality, then it's kind of whose morality, right? So like you said, it's if you have a free market system where the people that have the money to pay are able to go and obtain the resources that they need, and because there's the profit motive, there's going to be more resources and people will offer up more supply. And then you'll have people that can't afford it. They might not be able to go and obtain those resources, but that's why we get into charity, right? And so, I've been in that kind of situation where I had to go to the emergency room, and it's like a $1,300 bill, but they do have charity at almost every hospital, right?
Yes, and well, you could also point to the fact that charitable donations and especially like socialized medicine in Israel, where Israel was for the longest part communist, socialist, based upon the communal tribes of the kibbutz and stuff like that, to where they're able to share without the necessary coercion of a state force. Now, you could say that that would still fall under the ideas of socialism and being able to share. So if you still had socialized healthcare under the shared paradigm of something like a kibbutz, then you would alleviate the issue of the force and coercion behind a state actor, removing wealth from one to give to another. And then you wouldn't have necessarily the same argument from efficiency, because you're still going to have the same standard of efficiency with or without a price signal, because the price will maintain whatever the price signal would be with or without the socialist state behind it.
Yeah, so that's more of a charity aspect. I mean, socialism is force, right? So when we're talking about a socialized medicine, we're talking about the government forcing one person to pay for another person's medicine, whether he likes it or not. But if you get into like a commune or something like that, then that's voluntary. And I think every capitalist would be like, hey, whatever, you guys want to go off and do your own thing voluntarily, then I don't have any problem with that. I think it's a basic essential liberty that if you want to go off and give up all of your possessions to the commune, then you can do that voluntarily. But the problem with socialized medicine is there is no voluntary action here.
All right. Well, I want to say from a strictly debate standpoint, I would reject your definition in place of my own, and I would reject your value system in place of my own. But since we're going to keep this more informal, I'm going to have to I'll go with you. Yeah, when we speak of socialism, especially socialized medicine, we're speaking strictly of a government intervention into the marketplace, which, like I said, it's not just a matter of efficiency. There are short-run and short-term benefits, such as longer life, cheaper prices, purely because of socialized government can force companies to sell to them at certain prices, whereas a private company cannot barter at those prices. So you have to ask yourself, what is going to be the greater strain on the medicine providers and the providers of technology and capital to hospitals at the end of the day, and not just necessarily the consumer. So if a socialized healthcare can get those resources at a cheaper price, wouldn't the price signaling then be lower for an aggregate for that country?
Well, I would take issue with some of the things you said. One is the idea of that it provides for a longer life, and I think socialized medicine actually does not provide for a longer life, and it doesn't provide for cheaper care either. I mean, if you look at the way that so we could take an example of Canada. You can think of, you might be thinking in terms of the prescription drugs in Canada, right?
Yeah. Well, not just Canada, the Nordic model as well, and some other places.
There's a lot of issues because one, you can look at little tiny countries like Norway that, by the way, has what do they have, like 1 point some trillion dollars in their sovereign wealth fund from sale of oil in the North Sea, right? So they have a lot of money, and I don't want to get too much into that, but they have a lot of money to pay for everything that they want. And of course, because they have that and they give handouts left and right, they can't find anybody to work, right? So they have to bring in a lot of people from Eastern Europe and the Balkans and stuff to come up and work the oil fields to get the money. And there's all kinds of problems that are associated with their system. But they do have that sort of massive amount of money that they can use to pay for their system. And so that's part of their model. And you can look at some other countries that are very small countries that have a very different cultural and social structure than the United States. Sweden's, I think, 10 million people or something like that?
Yeah, 98% homogenous.
Right, exactly. And they have an actual, for a long time, the Swedes have said they kind of had this cultural feeling that, hey, we're all in it together. But as soon as they started to get that 98% goes down to 97, and they're bringing in a lot of people are marching all the way across Europe to get the goodies and the socialized handouts that Sweden's getting. They're starting to question the idea that we're all in it together.
Yeah.
So it's starting to fall apart there as well. Go back to the drug model that I was saying, is that Canada, they do force they kind of negotiate is what they do, right? They negotiate with the drug companies, and the United States does not. So the drug companies might lose money in Canada, but they can make it up which is not a free market system either. So anybody that's watching, hopefully there's some people watching, but there is no free market medicine in the United States. There's been no free market medicine in probably over 100 years. So
it depends on how you want to treat 1920s, 1930s. Yeah, that's about 100 years when we really, the New Deal-esque and started pushing through.
Now there is actually free market medicine in eye care, right? So you've got glasses. Have you ever looked into having LASIK eye surgery?
Oh yeah, it's unbelievably cheap. So is plastic surgery. It's unbelievably cheap as it's an unregulated market. Oh no, I get that. Again, I have to take my point and debate with it, whether I agree with it or not. So
insurance doesn't pay for it. Government doesn't pay for it, right? I mean, these things are cash pay, and they used to do it with little razors. They used to call it. They call it scalpel surgery type thing. Yeah. They had little scalpel. Now they do lasers, and technology has gone to where that the quality has gone vastly higher, and the cost has gone way down. And it's because they compete. I mean, you can call up a LASIK. Hey, I need my eyes done. How much do you charge? And they will tell you. Versus, I just had a medical procedure yesterday that's a cortisone shot. So I don't know if you ever had those, but those. They bill you at $4,000, and then the insurance shuts it down to $2,000, and you pay. I paid $200, so I didn't even. I first did it. I didn't even question how much it would cost. Oh, great! Two of you now. I don't know.
We got the advantage. I do want to make a small caveat to the whole Norway and the Nordic model. People have a very short memory of the 80s and 90s when there was a huge collapse in the entire Nordic model, to where they had to rebuild the Nordic model because it had overdrafted itself to the extent of extinction. That being said, back to socialized medicine as a plus. There's also the idea that America is going to start having a loss of capital, human capital, in the medical field. And this kind of goes to like the whole social movement in the United States towards the left and away from, I guess you could say, hard sciences. And a lot of young men and young women are really being pushed out of the idea of going to college purely because it's just a giant propaganda piece, and they don't necessarily want to go there. And so the first 4 years, they're typically done. I have multiple friends, myself included. I'm preparing for graduate school in economics, and I don't really want to go to college anymore. And I'm hoping that when I get to my graduate studies, I don't have to deal with the onslaught of stupidity. But I have multiple friends, engineering, pre-med, biomedical engineering. They're done. They get their undergraduates, and they're stopping.
Well,
So they're not going. Whereas socialized, let me finish this last point real quick. Yeah. Socialized medicine would give not necessarily a better incentive, but a forced incentive for people to go and do these things. Like communist Russia had some of the greatest astrophysicists and rocket physicists purely because they forced them into that.
Right, I could kidnap your daughter and hold her as a hostage to make you go to med school. Yes. I mean, that could happen, yes. Like Stalin would kidnap your whole family and then make you go off and make you search. So, I mean, there are some advantages, I guess, to that. You could talk about, do we want a total tyrannical society where one guy makes all the decisions? Yeah, I mean, it's very efficient in some ways. But obviously, we saw how that works in China and Russia and stuff, where you have the Great Famine because Mao didn't like sparing.
Right.
So he kills 40 million people, and it didn't work so well.
Yeah.
That central planning, one guy makes a mistake. The problem with central planning, one guy makes a mistake. Everybody, the bottom-up approach, spontaneous order that you're probably familiar with, is that we all make our own decisions. Nobody pays except me for. So I was talking about graduate school. Obviously, I've done quite a bit of graduate school, and in graduate school, I didn't really. You're in college, so you're gonna get it. You're gonna experience all that stuff that you talked about. It's terrible, but in the hard sciences, you won't experience it as much. You're gonna see it everywhere on campus, but once you go into your economics class and economics and business, because they're the two that deal with the real world. That's what I say. They tend to be much more reality, much more on the right.
Well, that used to be the case. I want to make a caveat. That used to be the case. I think Mankey, after he released his book, talked about it. Where he got all of those numbers and statistics for everything economists agree on, and it was like there's a resounding agreement on economists on a lot of issues that were like, hey, this is what right wingers believe. And then nearly 2 years after the release of his second edition, I think he's like on the 6th or 7th edition now. I'd have to check my old principles book, but it's not even remotely 50-50 anymore. A lot of economists are being pumped out extremely left-wing. Piketty and his, I don't want to call them heterodox, but they're post-Keynesian as much as they want to use new Keynesian models. They're post-Keynesian. I mean, they even reject DSGE for the most part, but they're really taking over. So I applied to Virginia Tech. I spoke to them, and everybody that had pulled their dissertation out for the past 3 years was something dealing with inequality or agriculture. If it wasn't agriculture, it was inequality. It's bad. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I was in New York I did a doctoral program. I did my master's at San Diego State, and I didn't really have much of a problem. But I was in New York, and when I took some classes outside of economics. I mean, yeah, economics, they have a lot of nonsense that they go through there, but it's mostly just kind of, I think, poor economic theory. But I took a poli-sci class. That was actually pretty good because it was from a foreigner. And I took an environmental economics class, and the professor was good, but the students were all, let's just say, leave it there. But, so we even had a group paper, and they wrote it, and at the bottom of the paper, they wrote, "And now an essay by Nelson." That's That's how outside of the mainstream in that class I was. But so we can actually chat about that later.
Yeah.
Definitely chat about that outside. So as far as human capital in the medical field, yeah, I think you're right that a lot of people are moving outside of the field, and a lot of smart doctors are going into administration because as a doctor, you got to fill out paperwork. And it is because we're going into this socialized medicine where you have to deal with government and insurance is a part of this. Insurance really, it makes. I had my cortisone shot a year ago, and I was chatting with the doctor about it, and he said, "Yeah, insurance is something that makes medicine much less fun, doctor less fun." So, it's an issue. Although I would say insurance is not. It is part of a market system. Although the kind of insurance we have these days is problematic, and get into that a little bit if you want, but. Yeah, there is a lot of human capital leaving the field because of the regulation. The ACA, I read somewhere they developed something like 10,000 new codes to where, clap on.
No, stop.
But the ACA developed something like 10,000 new codes, so now they have got burned by a curling iron held by a 3-year-old, held by a 5-year-old. I mean, it really is just ridiculously absurd how crazy that these burn things are. The new codes are.
Yes.
I wanted to go back to the idea of living longer as well. The age also depends because a lot of these things are self-reported. So, what's that buffoon that went down to Cuba, did Sicko, Michael Moore.
Oh, Michael Moore.
So he goes down to Cuba and he says, "Oh, Cuba has a much longer lifespan, right? Expected lifespan." No, Cuba, if you're stillborn or you die within a week of birth, a child dies within a week of birth, they're not counted. So yeah, if you take out a whole bunch of zeros, your average is going to go way up. So a lot of these countries, they self-report. You can go to the old Soviet Union, who were immensely prosperous, right, on paper. But if you went to the Soviet Union, nobody had anything in reality. So yes, on paper, socialized medicine can easily be, sound good. We go to the VA. They had a very good system on paper, but then it was exposed that they were just removing names from the lists and they were putting them on other lists. And so if they added those lists together, they had a very high death rate. Yeah, I mean, you look like, were you in the Marines or?
I was in the Army.
You're in the Army. Okay. So just looking at you, I figured you were probably ex-military.
Yeah. Which
well.
Which is going to lead to my next point about the VA versus actual military medicine, which would be closer to what we would assume to be socialized medicine. It's always kind of a weird standalone to say the VA when it comes to socialized medicine because of how it's set up, where it's really selective in its processes. But if you go to the actual military and the healthcare standards that they have within the military, it's something closer to what we would have with actual full-on socialized medical care in the United States. Now, one of the great things about the military and its medical system is that it gets rid of about 95% of the inefficiencies in human problems. So let's say me and you are feeling bad. What they're going to do in the military force is give you some ibuprofen and some water until you just sweat it out. Now, this has multiple benefits. One, you're not using so many antibiotics, so we're not building such a grand resilient bacteria strain within the unit. Secondly, if we were at that type of socialized medicine where people were just getting booted out, like, okay, your foot hurts, that sucks, get over it, I don't care. You would actually see a huge drop in falsified cases for going for healthcare or healthcare, I guess you could say, where people would go there for simple minor problems. almost like Singapore, how Singapore basically says you have to pay for everything out of pocket. So it eliminates a lot of the waste that goes into people going for a sniffle, going for a sore throat, stuff like that. So it would have the very same effect if it was given that style of socialized medicine, to where you aren't even a number, you're just useless, go away. Unless there is something seriously wrong with you, we don't actually care, because you can go and take some ibuprofen and you'll be fine.
Yeah, well, it's an incentive to make it well, right? Because they want to stick you in the cannon and shoot you out of it as fodder. But the military has a built-in incentive, and that's really what we're talking about here is incentives in economics. People act, and they act with purpose, and there's always incentives to make them act in certain ways. And so the military's incentive is to make sure that you can still run around and operate the tank or whatever. And so if you go into a 4-year thing, they're also thinking about now, not later. Versus once you go to the VA, then a lot of those incentives go away. They just like get you out, give you something, get you out the door. And it's like you mentioned the old Soviet Union, that's the problem with socialism altogether is there is no price. That's the real problem. That's why it falls apart. But 2, there's no incentive. So you could have a restaurant with a line down the street, and then everybody inside just kind of milling around like they don't really want to work, because whether they work or not, they get their daily rations. And that's kind of how it is with the VA system. That there's no incentive to get people in, fix them, and then get them out the door. Versus the way that things are going, I think, are this guy on here is continually harassing me. But is that they're going to this concierge type of system, right? Where they have a menu cost and they say cash pay, and they don't need a whole army of clerks, paper shufflers and form fillers and coders and stuff that they pay $100,000, $200,000 a year. They can just negotiate prices with various clinics, and everything you pay is a cash price. You know exactly what you're gonna pay when you go in, and that really creates this efficient model where people know what they need. They have a problem. They go in. The doctor will spend the time with the patient, and his goal is to get them well. Because if he doesn't fix them, they can always go to somebody else that actually does the job. Versus, like again with a VA or specialized medicine, it's like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Right? Oh, you don't like what I provided for you? That's too bad. I don't really care. Right? I mean, that's the real problem with the socialized. There's just no incentive. When you have a monopoly like that, there's no incentive to do anything well at all.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to refute that point. That's a strong point. I'm going to let that stand to anyone who wants to judge the debate. But I am going to push something else to you, and I'm going to go back to what I was talking about earlier with the military and not using antibiotics and things of that nature. And you were talking about the incentive for the doctor to get people better. There's definitely, I don't know if you've ever heard of the dichotomy between the first world and the third world when it comes to medicine, right? So in the first world, most of our problems can be attributed to like autoimmune. Cancer is a serious issue, whereas in the third world, they have the problem with like legitimate diseases and things of that nature. So over all this overabundance of antibiotics has built a serious problem for the West, and it will eventually happen. And we see it with staph infections and things of that nature. As a wrestler, it's something I worry about on a consistent basis. So if we made a centralized, socialist healthcare, we could have a centralized, nationalized database for diagnosis, treatment, being able to understand and guard against these. Whereas right now, if we go to like the Singapore model, we would have absolutely no way to track all of this. The paperwork trail and trying to get that together, that's the reason why it's so expensive, is that this paperwork trail is just is unbelievable. You've got inefficiencies as duplicate paperwork, claim approval, insurance submissions, and that could be streamlined. And all of this could be brought together to limit the West's own destructive problems when it comes to antibiotics and how they treat viral infections, and being able to get ahead on that through the CDC and things of that nature.
Yeah, if you had a market system, then there could be a system developed from the bottom up, and I think we've seen that in a lot of other areas. We hear these examples all the time, but that where individual offices will get together and they'll agree to have BBB, right? The Better Business Bureau,
Mm-hmm.
or Yelp, or things like that, where these are just private businesses have developed a type of system where you can share information on a forum. And yeah, you could, in theory, have that type of system that you were talking about with a socialized medicine, but my contention is that it wouldn't work because it would be developed by government. And so I just say it wouldn't work. I think there's no reason to think that it would work. One thing I forgot to say is that a lot of people bring up like Sweden and Japan and all these other nations that perhaps they might, they have these socialized medicine and they might have long life expectancies, but they don't have a McDonald's. So there are external factors that come into play when you're talking about a healthy citizenry. So in the United States, you have 1/3 of the population is obese, which is, say, extremely overweight. And so you don't have that. You just don't have that problem in pretty much any other country. And I would argue it's because we're so blessed with abundance. Just imagine, and this kind of goes into a whole nother issue, but just imagine 1850 where I said, hey, you know what the problem is? There's too much damn food, right? So that's something for the entire history of mankind that only the king would ever have said something like that. But now if you're poor, too much food is your problem. So it's just kind of a ridiculous problem to have. But so
that
lifestyles, huh?
That points to an inefficiency within the capitalist market right there. Is that
I disagree with that.
We're allowed to get so fat to the extent that it's killing us. And you have to ask yourself, in the long run, is that going to build into a total inefficiency within the healthcare market? And pure socialism would limit that because you would have not enough food. You wouldn't be fat.
Well, again, that's like, let's attack one problem, right? And we'll come up with this massive system that will destroy this one problem. Again, you can go to what I said with Mao and the sparrows, like his 4 pests. Let's wipe out these 4 pests and totally ignore everything else that would come out of that. And yes, if you went to a Venezuelan model, obesity is not a problem down there. In fact, they're losing weight. They're losing weight. Very, very good job they're doing down there with their diet system, forced diet. But
I think 10 years of socialism would help America lose a good bit of weight.
Most assuredly.
I'll be right back in 2 seconds.
Okay. So while he's gone, I'll just say that as we say, if you look at any system out there, then rationing is the eventual result, and it's actually openly stated. Well, now he's back, so I would say I wanted to bring up. Maybe you might have heard Dr. Emmanuel, the architect of the Affordable Care Act. Familiar with the Emmanuel brothers? I heard a joke that Emmanuel, the mayor of Chicago, is the other one. He's the other brother, but it doesn't always mean God is with us, right? So, anyways, Dr. Emmanuel had said that he believes that you should be comfortable dying at 75. Like he said, he wants to die at 75. He's okay with that, and he thinks that everybody should feel that way. And of course, he reserved the right to change his mind once he hits 75. But that is basically the model that he's openly admitting, that in a socialist planning centralized system of socialized medicine, you're going to have some age in which, I'm sorry, you're just too old and you're not a benefit to society to expend very scarce resources on. And so when chosen between the surgery between an 85-year-old grandmother and a 25-year-old young man to have some kind of surgery that's going to make them better off physically, then you would say, well, you're 85, it's too bad. I know you could pay for it if you wanted to, but no, we're just not going to give you the surgery that you need to survive. And because we have scarce resources, and we're going to give this to some young man who, we believe some bureaucrat thinks is going to be a better benefit to society because he's younger, right? It's the old lifeboat. Who do you toss out? Oh, we toss out the old guy because, they're useless. So.
We're doing final points. I'm sorry, I was running around.
Oh yeah, I guess we could jump into the final points.
Well, I thought that's because you were kind of like doing a brief overview.
You stepped away, so I was like, for anybody that is watching, rather than a blank screen or something.
Right.
But yeah, it's about that time. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you go first. I'll take the last point for negative.
One of the socialist ideas is from him with ability to him with need, right? And so I think that creates a vast unfairness where you have two kids, and so you need more than I need. I'm married, and we don't have any kids, and so is it right that we should take some of my income to pay for yours? And I don't think so. But that's basically what socialism would do, is to pay for your children, you would take someone else's, and that kind of alleviates you of some of the responsibility that you've taken on, that you voluntarily taken on. No, not to say anything, but good luck with your kids. You raise them right, all that.
Well, she's already starting on calculus.
You should. Like I've just been thinking, if I had kids, that's what I would do. I would start them young on. I would teach them free market economics and math and all that stuff, and my wife teach them Mandarin and all that. So anyways, yeah. So back to socialized medicine, doesn't last. It eventually collapses because of rationing and because of the expense and the inefficiencies it creates. And I just yesterday saw a video from England how their ERs are completely overcrowded because everything's free. And so, and the reason that they eventually do run out is that when you provide everything for quote unquote free, then that price system as a way to ration goes away. And so you can't, what the role of pricing is to make sure that people want what they're getting, right? So if something costs $100, I better value that product at $100 or more dollars, or I'm not going to buy it. But when something is free and I really don't value it at all, I'm like, well, what the hell? I'll take it anyways, right? It doesn't cost me anything. Do that with samples in the store, right? So it's like, I don't really want this, but yeah, it's free. I'll try it. Right? I have no interest in buying it. So that's kind of the problem with socialism is that once something's free, there is an immense demand, and you run out of supply. There is no incentives. There, all the stuff that we talked about. So
I'm going to make my final point, and my final point is that socialized medicine in the short run is a net positive. In the long run, the only net positive to private run is that it can afford, at the consumer's expense, research and development. Now, I will make my three main points. One is hygiene, where it comes down strictly to the inability of the capitalist system to rightfully build the system for a national disease database and things of that nature, and to work with the CDC, especially if we move into a laissez-faire. Secondly, socialized medicine should ration, as does the price system, but it is a more moral, in my morality, consequentialist, more moral action, whereas it will remove the old rather than the young who cannot afford, because within a capitalist system, the older you are, the more likely you are to be wealthy and well off, which would cause serious problems for things like human capital in the long run. And the last one that I would say is that due to the grand collapse of human capital within the United States, and that we're having a shortage of doctors, but we're having an overage of nurses, where people are getting their RNs, and we're not seeing what Gavin McGinnis would call the guys with autism, or even what Tyler Cowen refers to as the infovores. They're not moving into these sciences anymore, because for them to get to their graduate level and to their med schools and things of this nature, they have to go through so much cultural Marxist bullshit that they end up having severe anxiety issues and severe problems. And this lack of human capital within the system will eventually collapse. So either the United States can either choose to have a cultural and social war where the right side will win, or it has to move to a completely socialized healthcare standard and let it run free and ration out, and hope that as a consequentialist, hope that we can weed out the weak and keep the strong.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of saying you're going to have to go to one direction, right? Sounds like you're kind of saying you're either this mixed system is causing the problems, like the idea that we're mixing in a little socialism, a little quote unquote free market, and a little more social, like trying to mix it all together, get the right balance of one or the other. Yeah. So I don't disagree with that really.
Well, in pure debate, I would have to attack the status quo as the negative, unless I'm going to offer a counter policy, which the only counter policy I could have for socialized would be pure countrywide socialism, because that's the only logical conclusion that you're going to have. That's why I'm going to try to stick to that as much as possible. I haven't had a legitimate debate in about a year and a half. Last time I competed at a regional competition. So,
yeah. So I think that you have a point. Although I would say, if you did go to a socialist medicine, I think you could do it at maybe a state wide. I mean, if you're going to force it, and then of course, then I would say, well, it's going to prove to collapse. It'll prove what a disaster it is. But you could do it at a state level, and that way anybody like me that says, oh, this is bullshit, then I'm getting out of here, right? So although I kind of like you, it's tough to move when you're married with children, right? But
yeah.
If you did say, oh yeah, this socialist system sucks, I'm going to move to Texas, right? Which is actually what I would like to do. But again, she doesn't want to go anywhere. So.
Right, women and children mess everything up.
I know. That's what I comment. Is like, oh, kids ruin everything, right?
Yeah,
I don't know that yet, but just the way it seems from my observations.
I'm not going to tell you. It's definitely one of the trade-offs that you'll face in life. You'll have a trade-off between your personal private time and some of the goals that you want to go to, or the love of a child, which
yeah.
And I try not to bank on emotions at all. So for me, my child is a means to an end. My child is something that's going to be able to not only carry on my legacy, but carry on, and this may get a little strange, but carry on Western legacy. Whereas, being able to contend and go through life and have those strong math skills, strong free market economic skills that I think are really going to be lacking in the next 10, 20 years. And if she stays on track with her old man, then maybe we might have a better generation. We've just got to have more people.
Well, I see you've got. Is that a lot like John Locke? Is that your?
Yes.
Life, liberty, and property.
Yes, everything our founding fathers stole to create a country.
Well, you mean the ideas?
Oh yeah. Well, he was a huge influence on Alexander Hamilton and really all of them.
Yeah. Well,
And
the property is essential, right? And I mean, property gets to kind of what we're talking about, the right of property. Once you obtain property legally and morally, you have a right to do with it what you want. And so
yeah.
that's forward. Okay, definitely I'll chat